Um, it's a real pleasure for me to be here with all of you. Uh, as Wen-Yun mentioned, I spent the early part of my career as a political speechwriter for Attorney General Ed Meese in the Reagan administration and for Governor George Duke-Machen. If you ever wonder, for those of you who remember that far back, I was the guy who gave George Duke-Machen all that charisma. Uh, uh, I always say, and many of you might remember the Los Angeles County Supervisor, Mike Antonovich. I was actually his speechwriter as well. And so I always say that behind every great man, there's a little Japanese guy at a keyboard. No, I want to start off by thanking CFER so much for last night's award that for Education Reform Award that they gave to me, bestowed upon myself and Mary Barkey. That was totally unexpected, huge surprise, and it meant a lot to me, I'm sure to Mary as well, because of how much we hold CFER close to our hearts and in such high regard. I want to thank, first of all, too, the sponsors of this conference. All of us are enjoying this great day and a half here with CFER because of the financial commitment of the sponsors, and I want to thank them for what they've done to make this day possible. I think as one of the speakers said earlier today, you got to follow the money. Thank you for the money. Now, CFER is close to my heart for all kinds of reasons, including the amazing work the organization does in the face of incredible odds. The victories that you've all achieved, despite the seemingly unbeatable strength of the opponents facing CFER, is just really amazing. It's really one of the untold stories here in California politics, how this organization has been able to face down these supposedly invincible entities in the legislature and in the activist world, and yet CFER has come out on top. And I hope that at some point that story becomes much more widely known because it's really well deserved. And I think one of the reasons for that success is because CFER has been so good, despite its relatively small size, to be able to bring together allies from so many different communities together. Just have to look at all of you here today representing various communities, all come together because we all believe in principles of freedom, non-discrimination, and true equality. And the reason why we've been all brought together is because of CFER. From CFER is the hub from which all the spokes stem. And because of that, we've been able to not only get together, but we've been able to have that strength of numbers in order to succeed and then face down and beat the odds that have been arrayed against us. Let me also say that for myself personally, one of the most gratifying things has been the friends that I've made through CFER. I'm sure that in the last day or so, you've been able to make friends just talking amongst yourselves, right? Meeting people that you never knew who were actually carrying that same water that you've been carrying in your locality. And I think that bringing together all of these people has, strengthens us emotionally in order to go forward to do this important work. And I've made incredible friends, from old comrade in arms like Gail Harriott, who you and I were working together on the Prop 209 campaign many years ago, to my great friends such as Mary Barkey and Saga Conroy, and to my wonderful friendship and professional collaboration with CFER's executive director, Wen-Yuan Wu. Let me say here that and she does not get the credit she deserves. Wen-Yuan is a true treasure. Her research, her writing, her organizing, and her strategizing have been crucial to the success not only of this organization, but to our movement and to the success of our ideas in California generally. And so with Wen-Yuan, her team, with Frank, and all the others who are here at CFER, thank you very much for all that you do. Now, speaking of my professional collaboration with Wen-Yuan, I have a few copies of our co-authored book, The Great Parent Revolt, which discusses critical race theory in America's schools. And that's available back there after my speech for a small donation. And I'm saying this, I think, for the first time publicly, that Wenwan and I will be co-authoring a new book. So that will be coming out sometime next year, and it will be on this issue of equity. So, but I'm very pleased that before that book comes out, that I actually have another book. That's the thing when you work for a think tank. It's like you can't rest on your laurels. People say, well, what are you doing now? Okay, I just wrote a book. So I have a new book that was released 2 weeks ago, and it's called The Great Classroom Collapse. And, Mark Twain once said that he hated writing, but he loved having written. When I wrote as I was writing The Great Classroom Collapse, it was really one of the most challenging books that I've ever had to write for all kinds of different reasons. But now, having written it, I can say that it's actually one of the most important books I think I've actually ever written. So why do I think it's so important? First of all, I think it's tremendously important for us to figure out what is really causing the nosedive we're seeing in student achievement, not just in California, but around the country. And so we have a number of school board members and candidates for school boards here today who are going to try and turn that around, I know, in their districts. I know we have Sandra Crandall, who's here today. We have at my table Perla, Tamiko, and and Michelle is over there. So I know that there are probably others who are running for board and who are board members, of course, in addition to Mary Barkey. And I want to tell you just how important that is, that all of you have stood up and stepped forward to take on that huge responsibility. And my friend Emily there, who from Oceanside, who member of the school board there, who have taken on that big responsibility to take the slings and arrows that the other side is going to throw at you in order to actually keep the interests of children first in your districts. Now, when you look at national test scores, they fall into their lowest levels in decades, with 7 out of 10 eighth graders failing to score at the proficient level in reading and math. Now, it's easy to blame COVID and the school shutdowns because of COVID for this poor performance. But actually, if you look at the trend, the test scores in those basic subjects were poor before COVID started. They only got worse. So it was starting from a low bar and then went through the floor. All right? So I wanted to find out what were the fundamental failings of the school system that were causing this collapse in learning. And that's why I wrote The Great Classroom Collapse. So in order to understand the collapse of reading and math, I dug down into the classroom level. So I interviewed students, parents, teachers, tutors. I interviewed a college math instructor. I interviewed a Democrat state legislator who is actually pushing good legislation to reform how reading is taught in this state. So these problems that what I found once I went in and dug into the ground level, I found that there were 3 main problems that were affecting classroom education across the country. One of them, unsurprisingly, given what we've talked about today, is that there's a lot of non-merit-based social justice practices being pushed in the classroom, and excellence and individual initiative and merit are all being pushed aside in order to make room for these equity-driven ideological practices. Secondly, you have bad standards and poor curricula. And thirdly, you have teaching methods that have little or no research base in order to justify them being used in our classrooms to dumb down our students. So, one of the reasons why I wrote this book too was I wanted to focus on individuals. Now, working for a think tank, I'm very familiar with research, statistics, numbers, but you know something? I've worked for the Pacific Research Institute now for 30 years. I can't believe that. I always tell people I was working in the Reagan administration when I was 12. And anyway, but one of the things that when I first became a think tank person that I thought was that, if I just got the best research, the best statistics. Everybody would be convinced. And Gail, no, right? Uh, so no, because what does the other side do? The other side plays on your emotion, on your heartstrings, right? They'll come up with, some kid who gives a story, and that totally trumps all the statistics and research that you put forward and you thought were going to change the day. So what I did in this book was I used their tactic against them, and I focus on individual interviews with all of these people in the school system, the parents, the students, the teachers, the tutors, etc., right? Because personal stories change minds. And so, yes, I interweave some research in there, but really it's their stories that I wanted to get out because our side does not tell personal stories. And that's what changes people's minds. If you're asked a question to justify something, and you try and think up the latest study from Harvard or whatever, and the other person says, I talked to Jimmy, and he's in the 8th grade, and he said this and that. You know something? The person listening to that exchange is going to believe the person who brings up Jimmy. And so that's what I did in this book. And we talked a lot to a lot of these parents, and that's why in each of the chapters in my book is devoted to a single individual who is telling their aspect of the education implosion story. And a lot of it has to do with this social justice equity agenda that we've been talking about. The whole first section of my book is devoted to that. And, I don't need to tell all of you, I think Professor Bowen, I think it was this morning, talked about the difference between equality and equity, right? But just as a reminder again, equality is, giving people the equal opportunity to perform and excel based upon their own hard work and effort, whereas equity, on the other hand, seeks the same result for all students, regardless of their student merit and effort. And equity, as it's used in the schools, and as Chris Arendt has pointed out in his fine book back there, is really a Marxist concept that promotes mindless sameness. So concepts like excellence and individual achievement are viewed as suspect because they supposedly result from the privilege of the student, not from the talent and hard work of the student. That's why many schools, as was discussed earlier this morning, are now closing off pathways to excellence and instead are seeking to bring down students to a common lower level. So how does equity ideology affect the average students? I interviewed a student named Charlotte, which is not her real name because she requested anonymity. Charlotte is the daughter of a Swiss immigrant mom and a father whose family fled communism in the People's Republic of China. She attends a California public high school that used to that was highly regarded and that had used an entrance exam for admission, merit-based. But the school district decided that this exam-based admission system did not support equity, so the district changed to a random lottery system. What the district wanted was a student body based on racial proportionality rather than a student body where all applicants, regardless of race, had the equal opportunity to be admitted based upon their own merit. When Charlotte saw how this change in the school's admissions criteria would negatively impact students who had worked so hard to prepare themselves for admission into this school, she spoke up at one of the webinars that the school district had organized to elicit community input regarding the admissions charge. She wanted to, in her own words, say, I want to speak up for my classmates and friends who were saying this is unfair. However, she was shocked when she went on that webinar when others started attacking her, calling those who attended the schools white supremacists or Asians. It's a weird kind of like, white supremacists or Asians. It's like, I always think that's kind of weird. Isn't that weird? The guy from Minnesota keeps saying, oh, that's weird, But I'll tell you, that's weird. All the Asians here in the audience, you probably know that, we're the other side will view us as, ooh, they're white adjacent, right? Oh, those white adjacent Asians, which is interesting because I'm Japanese, right? And so Now, my grandfather was in an internment camp in World War II in a swamp in Arkansas, and I guess he was adjacent to the guards. Just saying. So, anyway, it must have rubbed off though. Anyway, so Charlotte told me that throwing out the merit-based admissions caused a disastrous domino effect at her school. She told me that because the students admitted to the school under the lottery system had a lower level of academic preparedness, teachers became more lenient. For instance, the school adopted a practice called equity grading, which views individual students who excel beyond their fellow classmates as likely to be the beneficiaries of privilege. So under equity grading, the evaluation system is therefore rigged to push high achievers down and push the grades of lower achievers up. So specifically, deadlines became fuzzier, with teachers adding grace periods for turning in late assignments. For tests, teachers offered more and more retakes. So if a student didn't do well, he or she could take it again, or again, or again. Also, instead of grading based upon scoring levels, like 90% gets you an A, right? There was a move to curve all test scores in order to give lower performers higher grades. Now, the problem with equity grading is that it promotes grade inflation, surprise, reduces the incentive for students to work hard, surprise, and ends up hurting student learning, surprise. In Charlotte's school, she said that because students were less prepared, her honors chemistry teacher didn't cover as much material as he would have in past years. Also, she said that class participation was very low because students weren't motivated. Charlotte said that she was held back in her own learning because her classes just spent time going over and over problems and materials that were already covered rather than going on to new content. So in math, for equity reasons, algebra was pushed from the 8th grade to the 9th grade. Why are schools in Charlotte's district doing this? Especially given that many students can handle algebra in the 8th grade. Well, the answer is because schools don't want some students to excel and achieve if that means that other students are supposedly left behind. Equity advocates therefore want to force all students into the lowest common denominator situation. And Charlotte's school district, for instance, even admitted, this is how confident they are in their political security and in the fact that they will never be challenged. They even admitted that they had a social justice agenda to eliminate 8th grade algebra and force all students into 9th grade algebra instead. Now, Charlotte told me, and this is her quote, they just wanted everyone to be on the same level, but the issue is that when you put everyone on the same level, you're restricting those who have the potential to go ahead, unquote. So in her English classes, she said, nobody enjoys it, and there's a lot of unnecessary work, like sometimes even baking, and a lot of the work is not even actually analyzing, writing, or learning vocabulary. And unsurprisingly, because of that, in her history class, she said that because students don't have good reading and writing skills, her history class turned into an English class to remediate the students for what they didn't learn in English. Charlotte said that she felt held back because there are lots of times where the teachers would go over problems that they had gone over time and time before, and they just spent time on that rather than the new content. And it's no surprise with all of that that Charlotte's school is now experiencing a record high failure rate. So all these bad results stem from an ideological equity agenda to which the schools and the school district pushed. And the school officials can see this failure, but their ideological commitment to equity is more important to the adults in the system than to the learning of the children in the system. And that blind commitment to Marxist equity ideology over merit and excellence can be seen in school districts around the country. I interviewed a Minnesota mom named Oradola Taylor. And Oradola grew up in the poor country of Sierra Leone in West Africa. She came to the United States. She earned degrees from Oklahoma University and the University of Wisconsin. She actually holds several U.S. patents. She got married and put her kids in a Minnesota public school called the French Immersion School. The school was run by a Nigerian American, and many of the teachers were from African countries like the Cameroon, Togo, and the Ivory Coast. Many of the school students were also immigrants or from immigrant families. And Oradola said that the school was high performing and was one of the stars of the school district. Now, you'd think that having a school like that doing so well with all these underserved kids, at-risk kids, would cause the districts to what? Want to replicate this school, scale up the French immersion model, and then, make that a norm for all kids in the district, right? Wrong. No, they went in the opposite direction. So the district started to get rid of the curricula and programs that made the French immersion schools so successful. For example, the district got rid of the successful traditional math program and curriculum. And Oradola had to then start sending her kids to an after-school math program and had to hire a tutor. And she wasn't the only parent that had to do so. She said that immigrant parents from India, Somalia, and Nigeria were all sending their kids to the Kumon After-School Math Center. And she said, after school, you'd see these immigrant kids, the first-generation kids, packed in there because the parents had to supplement what they weren't getting in their school. In fact, all the things that made the school successful were being taken away. So instead of high expectations for students, we talked about that this morning. Instead of high expectations for the students, grading became more lenient, just like in the California school I talked about. Grading became more lenient in the name of anti-racism and equity. Letter grades were eliminated and replaced by a pass-fail system so students could just slide by. Oradola said that these changes caused things to fall apart, with grade inflation becoming huge. And it just wasn't academics that were affected. Discipline policies were lowered due to equity concerns. But she said that the result was that, again, things just started to fall apart. She told me that there was an incident where a student was threatened, and another student threatened another student with a knife. But then the next day, the perpetrator was back in the classroom. Nothing happened. And she made the important point that even if it's just a few kids, it just breaks the spirit of the entire classroom. And the whole discipline thing, it was a huge one at the school. And she's absolutely right. Actually, if you look at the research, there's a study by the University of California at Davis, actually one of my alma maters. I don't give them a dime. and the University of Pittsburgh that found that a single disruptive student significantly increases the misbehavior of other students, which then, in a domino effect, causes a negative impact on student reading and math scores, which is common sense, right? But low be it for a progressive to understand common sense. And according to Oradola, when you have a poor start as a child, it's like the cure that keeps on giving. So it's really important to give your child the fundamentals. So the parents, what do? They start to protest at the school board meetings. All of these changes, they start to show up in numbers, and they start to tell the school board that don't take all this successful stuff away from my school. And what did the district officials do in response to all of that? They said that they told the parents that your school is privileged. You, the parents, you're too privileged. And we need all of you to be like everybody else. And in other words, equity trumped excellence. But remember, many of these parents, many of these families in the schools were immigrants from poor countries. However, the adherence to Marxist ideology was more important than the student achievement results. And what was more important than that was the Marxist narrative of oppression based upon race. So she told me that if you looked at what the school was doing, it was causing racial division. It was causing these kids to be race conscious about everything, and then basically to have the excuse of race as the reason why anything bad was going on. And so therefore, having this school with these kids from these families who were excelling was horrible for the district, because it gave a lie to that narrative that systemic racism was the cause for all the ills of the public school system in that district. And Ordola told me there is systemic racism in education, but the systemic racism in the current system is the racism that makes black kids not achieve. And then the assumption that blacks have no agencies. And if you don't help us, we're not capable. So that to me is racism, because there is nothing wrong with us. You know, bravo to Oridola. So let me say at this point that the insidiousness of the equity agenda is not restricted to high-profile issues like racial privilege and discipline policies. The equity agenda is being carried out in schools in many subtle ways. As Michael Bowen said this morning, DEI is insidious. And for example, I interviewed a man named Sugi Sorensen, who is one of the top engineers at the world-renowned Jet Propulsion Laboratory, just up the freeway from here. He manages the huge antennas stationed around the world that allow us to talk to spacecraft. Now, he told me that his kids attend an elementary school in LA County that uses group learning, where students are grouped into teams and team members work together to solve problems, and students are evaluated on the quality of group product rather than on the work of individual students. Progressive educators prefer this equity-based group learning to individual learning because they view individual learning as based on competition, where talented or hardworking students are rewarded while other students are viewed as losers. So students are supposed to not only learn the material themselves, but are asked to assist their fellow group members who may be struggling, which is supposed to stimulate the learning process. The trouble is that this utopian progressive equity theory doesn't work in practice. Sugi told me that what happens in group instruction is that one or two kids will do all the work, while the other kids will engage in what he calls social loafing. And social loafing occurs because those kids feel less accountable and less responsible for their own individual work. So he said, and this is his quote, "The cynical side of me thinks this is an equity-driven method to share the wealth. So you can take the grade of the strongest kid in the group and spread it amongst the 4 or 5 other kids, but it's also a false signal to those other kids who aren't learning." The bottom line, he said, is that group learning, especially in elementary schools, are just terribly inefficient, and you don't get much learning for all the people in that group. And it's no surprising that Sugi's kids hate group learning. So in addition, let me just start to wrap up here by saying that in addition to these Marxist equity policies that I discussed, my book includes interviews with teachers and tutors, college professors, and lawmakers who revealed the failed math and reading teaching methods and curricula that are being used in the schools, which are also a huge reason for the massive implosion of reading and math skills in this country. But I want to just tell you that I'm actually, Heather McDonald said that, she's temperamentally a pessimist. And, I used to think that, but then I'm kind of a, kind of an optimistic person too, So, there is hope in the book, actually. Parents are actually being activated because of these policies in purple, blue, red states to actually confront their officials and actually get things changed. And it's not just on these hugely big headline issues involving, let's say, gender or race and stuff like that. They're actually getting activated when it comes to some of this methodology things, such as how to best teach reading. So like in New York State, which is obviously ultra blue, Kathy Hochul, the governor, actually has pushed through a program that will return reading instruction in New York State back to phonics instruction and get rid of all of that whole language, balanced literacy, awful crap that has been causing students to fail at reading for so many years. And that's actually happening in New York State. Many of you know that in San Francisco, the parents there have successfully forced officials to do away with the algebra only in 9th grade requirement. Now, algebra can be available to students in the 8th grade because of the parents. Um, so let me end by going back to Oridola Taylor, the immigrant mom from Africa. So remember that Oridola should be living the American dream. But unfortunately, she and her kids have had to live through the American education nightmare. So Oridola saw firsthand how ideology and self-interest trump the needs of children, her own children, and others. And her conclusion is, and I just love this, you got to get the book just for this conclusion. She said her conclusion is that the government education system is a huge money laundering operation. She told me that there are kids out there who can't read, but everybody's getting their cut. The unions, the administrators. It's a crazy money laundering operation, and the taxpayers are paying out the nose for these kinds of results. And she says that the ultimate insult is that these schools have the nerve to say, let's keep this going, and then blame racism for the result. She told me that the incentives in public education are all wrong. Schools say, I need more money to do the same or worse, and that's the way the system works right now. On the other hand, she said that if you say that you're not going to get paid unless 90% of your kids are proficient in reading and mathematics, then all of a sudden they'd be doing whatever it took to get those kids to be proficient in math and reading. But if you get more money because of failure, you'll just get more failure. What you need to do, she says, is change the incentives. That's what's going to change American education. She wants to empower parents with choice options in education, forcing the public schools to compete and meet the demands of their consumers. She said, give me the money the money that I'm paying for my kids to go somewhere other than a public school, and that competition will fix the public school system in no time. She concluded, if educating kids is what pays, then that's what will happen. But if miseducating kids is what pays, then that's what will happen. If only our policymakers had the wisdom of this immigrant mom from West Africa, we'd be in a lot better shape today. And with that, as I say, I'll be back there with copies of my book. And I have for those of you who would just like to see a kind of a prelude to it, I have a piece in today's New York Post that discusses the book. It's actually a 2-page spread on the editorial page of today's New York Post. So take a look at that. Thank you.